except for the distant chirping of cicadas and the rhythmic sound of wind brushing through trees. That's when the moving truck pulled into the old Mitchell house across the street, the one that had been empty for almost a year. At first glance, she looked like calm itself, a 40-year-old American woman, her dark hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, dressed in a simple white blouse and faded jeans. There was something graceful about the way she moved, unhurried, yet deliberate, like she'd learned the value of silence. Her face carried traces of laughter that once came easily, faint lines near her eyes, a softness around her mouth. But her gaze, it carried weight. The kind of gaze that feels like it's searching for something it lost long ago. I'd offered to help carry a few boxes when she smiled for the first time, a small, careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes but warmed something inside me anyway. Her voice was low, even, with that quiet steadiness people gain after they've weathered too much. "Thank you," she said simply. "You didn't have to." I shrugged, pretending I wasn't affected by the way her words lingered, like a touch that didn't fade right away. "Just being neighborly," I said, but it came out more nervous than I wanted. As we carried boxes inside, I noticed the house still smelled faintly of paint and dust, yet her presence made it feel lived in already. There were framed photos she hadn't hung yet, a smiling couple by a lake, her hand resting gently on a man's arm. Her husband, I guessed. There was a moment, fleeting but unmistakable, when she caught me looking. She didn't flinch or turn away. Instead, she said softly, "He's gone." No hesitation, no explanation. Just truth laid bare. The words hung in the air between us, and for a second, I didn't know whether to apologize or stay silent. But she saved me from deciding. "Don't worry," she said, her lips curving into a faint, almost mischievous smile. "My heart still races, sometimes." It was said half in jest, yet her tone carried a quiet ache beneath it. That single sentence stayed with me long after I left her doorstep. There was something defiant in it, like she was daring life to challenge her heart again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and her window glowed amber in the fading light, I found myself glancing across the street more than once. I told myself it was just curiosity. But deep down, I already knew better. That first meeting wasn't just coincidence, it was the quiet beginning of something that neither of us had expected, something that would test every unspoken boundary between loneliness and longing. Keynote 2, expanded, 500 words, title ****. The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 2, the invitation, coffee, sunlight, and unspoken things. It started with something as simple as coffee. A few days after helping her move in, she caught me outside one morning, just as I was leaving for a run. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain from the night before. She stood by her front porch, watering a row of potted plants, lavender, basil, and something with small white flowers I couldn't name. Her dark hair was loose this time, brushing over her shoulders, catching bits of light from the rising sun. "Hey," she called, voice smooth but casual, "you like coffee?" I stopped, half grinning. "I mean, I practically run on it." She smiled, a real one this time, the kind that softened her entire face. "Good. Because I made too much." Inside her house, everything felt warm and lived in already. The morning light spilled across wooden floors and old furniture that looked like it had stories to tell. The faint scent of roasted coffee mixed with vanilla candles and something floral, her perfume, maybe. She poured 2 mugs, then handed me one. Her fingers brushed mine, barely, but enough to notice. There was something in that brief contact, not deliberate, but not accidental either. It carried a quiet electricity. We talked, not about anything big. Just the neighborhood, the weather, small things that didn't matter but somehow did. She mentioned that she'd been away for a while, living in the city, then decided to come back to where things were quieter. Her words carried layers she didn't explain, and I didn't ask. When she laughed, it was soft and low, the kind of laugh that sounds like it used to come easier once. I remember thinking how strange it was that someone could seem both steady and fragile at the same time. At one point, she paused, looked at me over her mug, and said, "You remind me of someone who still believes the world's kind." It wasn't a compliment, not exactly. It was an observation. And I didn't know how to respond. So, I smiled and said, "Guess I haven't been proven wrong yet." That earned me another small smile, but her eyes said something else. Something older, sadder. As I got up to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand brushed my arm lightly, just enough to make my pulse quicken. "You should stop by again," she said. "Maybe next time I'll bake something to go with the coffee." The words were simple, but the way she said them, calm, steady, almost teasing, felt like more than just a neighborly gesture. It was an invitation, not to coffee, but to something unspoken, fragile, and quietly dangerous. When I stepped outside, the sun had climbed higher, glinting off the windows of her house. I told myself I wouldn't read too much into it. But her voice lingered in my head, warm, careful, deliberate, and I knew that something had shifted between us. Not much. Just enough to make my heart race, the way hers once did. Keynote 3, expanded, 500 words, title The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 3, The quiet rain, secrets between cups and glances. It rained that afternoon, soft and steady, the kind of rain that makes everything feel slower, closer. The streets shimmered with silver reflections, and the air smelled like wet grass and coffee grounds. I found myself walking past her house again, no real reason, just habit, or maybe curiosity. Through the window, I saw her sitting by the table with a book, hair tied loosely, wearing a soft cream sweater and light blue jeans. There was something peaceful about her, even in stillness. Then, as if she sensed me there, she looked up and smiled. A minute later, the door opened. "Caught in the rain?" she asked. "Sort of," I said, brushing water from my hair. "I was just walking." "Then walk inside before you catch a cold." Her tone was gentle, but there was a hint of insistence, like she'd been waiting for an excuse to say it. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon and rain. The light was dim but golden, filtering through soft curtains. She handed me a towel, her fingertips grazing my wrist, light, but deliberate. It made something quiet inside me shift. We sat by the window, the rain tapping rhythmically against the glass. She made tea this time instead of coffee. As she poured, her bracelet slid down her wrist, revealing a faint scar near her pulse. She noticed me glance and smiled faintly, not embarrassed, just aware. "It's nothing dramatic," she said softly. "Old accident. My husband used to say I was terrible at taking care of myself." Her voice lingered on the word husband, soft, fragile, almost reverent. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, intimate. She looked out the window then, watching the rain fall. "Funny," she murmured, "how quiet the world gets when you stop expecting anything from it." I wanted to ask what she meant. But before I could, she turned back to me, her dark brown eyes searching mine as if trying to read a thought I hadn't spoken. "You're easy to talk to," she said after a moment. "You don't fill the silence." I smiled. "Maybe I just like listening." "Careful," she said, voice soft but teasing. "Listening too closely can be dangerous." Her laugh that followed was light, but her gaze stayed on me for a second too long. The air between us changed, not sharp, not sudden, just thicker somehow. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, time seemed to slow, drawn into the quiet rhythm of two people pretending to be just neighbors. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door again. The rain had stopped, and a faint mist hung in the air. She handed me an umbrella, hers, not mine, and said, "Keep it. You might need it again." Her hand brushed mine as I took it, and the faintest spark passed between our fingers. It wasn't lightning, it was something smaller, quieter, but it stayed. As I walked home under her umbrella, I realized the rain had left more than puddles behind. It had left a promise, one that neither of us dared to speak aloud. Keynote 4, expanded, 500 words, title ****. The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 4, the dinner, when distance feels too close. It started innocently. She'd mentioned earlier that week that cooking for one felt pointless sometimes, and I, half joking, half hoping, said, "Then don't cook for one." The next evening, there I was, standing at her doorstep, holding a bottle of cheap wine I'd picked out with too much thought and too little confidence. The door opened before I could even knock twice. She stood there in a deep green dress that fell just below her knees, simple but elegant, like something out of another decade. Her long black hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling near her cheek, and the faint scent of rosemary and lemon drifted from the kitchen behind her. "You clean up well," she said with a smile that almost masked her nervousness. "Almost." "You too," I said, before realizing how that might sound. Her laugh, soft, genuine, eased the air immediately. Dinner was already set on a small wooden table by the window. Candles flickered gently in the fading light, not romantic in intention, but the glow made everything feel warmer, closer. The smell of roasted chicken, garlic, and herbs filled the space, grounding it in something domestic, almost intimate. For a while, we talked easily, about books, music, places we'd never been. She told me about her late husband in pieces, like someone folding a memory carefully before passing it across the table. There was affection in her words, but also a quiet detachment, like she'd learned to love the story without reliving the pain. At one point, she reached across to pour me more wine. The sleeve of her dress slipped down slightly, revealing her wrist, the same faint scar I'd noticed before. My eyes lingered for half a second too long. She caught me, of course, and tilted her head with that knowing look she had, the one that made it impossible to tell if she was teasing or testing. "You look like you're thinking too much," she said softly. "Maybe I am," I replied. "About what?" "About how this doesn't feel like dinner with my neighbor." That made her pause. She set the bottle down, her fingers resting lightly on the rim of her glass. "Then what does it feel like?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because saying it aloud might make it real. "Like something I shouldn't want." For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Then she smiled, a small, tired smile that carried too many emotions at once. "You're not the only one," she said quietly. The words hung there between us, fragile but electric. After dinner, she walked me to the door again, the same as always, but it didn't feel the same. The air was charged now, with things unsaid, things neither of us had permission to feel. When I stepped outside, she called after me, voice softer than the wind. "Don't worry about my heart," she said. "It still races." I turned, caught off guard, but she was already smiling, calm, graceful, like she hadn't just said the one thing I wouldn't forget. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept hearing her words, over and over, wondering if they were meant as reassurance, or confession. Keynote 5, expanded, 500 words, title The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 5, the music room, a moment that lingered too long. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. I'd gone by her house to return the umbrella she'd lent me weeks ago, the one I'd secretly hoped she'd forget about. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, pleasantly, I thought. She wore a soft gray blouse tucked into light jeans, barefoot, with her hair loose and slightly wavy, like she'd just let it down after a long day. "Come in," she said, her voice carrying that same warmth that always managed to disarm me. "You're lucky, I was just about to play something." I hadn't known she played the piano until that day. The music room was small, tucked beside the living room, with sunlight spilling across wooden floors and dust floating lazily in the air. A sleek black upright piano stood against the wall, framed by photographs and an old vase of dried roses. She sat down and began to play, something quiet, haunting, a melody that sounded like it belonged to another lifetime. Her fingers moved gracefully, the notes soft but full, and for a while, I just watched in silence. The world outside could have stopped, and I wouldn't have noticed. When the song ended, she didn't turn around right away. She just let her hands rest on the keys, shoulders rising and falling with a small sigh. "It's strange," she said finally, "how something can sound beautiful and lonely at the same time." I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. "That's what makes it real, I guess." She looked up then, her dark brown eyes meeting mine. "Real can be dangerous. Maybe that's what makes it worth it." A faint smile curved her lips, but her eyes softened, that mix of affection and fear I'd started to recognize. "You say things like that," she murmured, "and I forget how young you are." There wasn't any judgment in her tone, only a quiet kind of sadness. But before I could respond, she shifted slightly on the bench, patting the spot beside her. "Here," she said, "your turn to try." I laughed nervously, sitting down. The bench was narrow, too narrow, and our shoulders brushed. She placed her hand over mine to guide it to the right key. Her touch was light, her skin cool from the air, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "See," she whispered. "You just have to feel it." I wasn't sure if she meant the music anymore. When the chord finally rang out, it wasn't perfect, slightly off, just enough to make her laugh. That sound, unguarded, real, felt like sunlight in my chest. We stayed like that for a while, not speaking, her hand still near mine, both of us pretending it was just about the music. Eventually, she stood, smoothing her blouse, as if reminding herself of a line that shouldn't be crossed. "Thank you for bringing the umbrella," she said with a soft smile. "You always seem to return things when I least expect it." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't returning anything, not really. That every time I came here, I left with something new instead. But I didn't say it. Because we both knew, the longer we sat there, the more impossible it was becoming to walk away untouched. Keynote 6, expanded, 500 words, title The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 6, the confession, the space between words. It happened on one of those evenings that feel suspended in time, the sky blushing gold, the air neither warm nor cool, just gentle. I hadn't meant to see her that day. But she'd texted me, short and simple, "Could use some company." No reason. I went, of course. There was never a reason good enough not to. When she opened the door, she looked tired in the way that comes from thinking too much, not from lack of sleep. She wore a soft white cardigan over a loose navy dress, her hair tied up in a careless bun, a few strands brushing against her temples. She smiled when she saw me, but it was a smaller smile than usual. "Long day?" I asked. "Long year," she said quietly, then laughed, shaking her head. "Sorry, that sounded heavier than I meant." We sat outside on her porch, where the fading sunlight filtered through the trees, painting patterns on the wooden floor. A pitcher of lemonade sat between us, untouched. The silence wasn't awkward, it never was with her, but there was something in the air, a weight that neither of us wanted to acknowledge yet. After a while, she broke it. "Do you ever feel," she began, her voice soft, "like you're finally breathing again after holding it for too long?" I turned to look at her. "Yeah," I said. "But then you realize you're scared to exhale, because it might all disappear." She smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're too young to sound that tired of life." "Maybe I'm just learning from you," I teased gently. That made her laugh, but it didn't hide the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her glass. There was something she wanted to say, I could feel it, the same way you can sense rain before it starts to fall. Finally, she set the glass down and looked at me, really looked. "You know," she said softly, "you've become a distraction." I froze. The word hung between us like a secret suddenly spoken aloud. She must have seen my confusion, because she smiled again, that graceful, knowing smile that always seemed to protect her from her own honesty. "Don't look so alarmed," she added, her voice low but steady. "It's not a bad thing. You make the days feel less quiet." Something inside me shifted, caught between hope and restraint. And what if I don't want to be just a distraction? She blinked slowly, her eyes softening. "Then it gets complicated." The quiet stretched long after that. The last of the light faded, leaving a soft amber glow over her skin. A single strand of hair fell loose from her bun, and without thinking, I reached out to brush it back. Her breath caught, barely audible, but enough. Our eyes met, and for that moment, nothing else existed. The world shrank to the space between her heartbeat and mine, the air charged with everything we weren't saying. But before I could speak, before either of us could step over that invisible line, she stood, slow and composed. "It's getting late," she whispered. "You should go before the night says something we can't take back." And even though I left, her words followed me home, soft and dangerous. Because she didn't say we shouldn't, she only said not yet. Keynote 7, expanded, 500 words, title ****. The widow said, "Don't worry about my heart, it still races." Part 7, the farewell, where every goodbye meant something more. A week passed before I saw her again. It felt longer, stretched thin by the silence that filled the days between. I tried to keep busy, late shifts, long walks, anything that made time move faster, but every small thing somehow led back to her. The way the sunlight hit the porch, the faint smell of cinnamon at the cafe, the echo of a song I didn't realize she'd left inside me. When she finally called, her voice sounded calm. Too calm. "Can you stop by?" she asked. Just for a moment. Her house looked the same, but something felt different as soon as I walked in. The air was cooler, quieter. Boxes were stacked by the doorway, not many, but enough to make my chest tighten. "You're moving?" I asked. "Not far," she said, her tone light but her eyes giving her away. "Just, time for a change. This house has too many memories." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She smiled, a small, practiced smile, and gestured toward the kitchen. I made coffee. One last cup before I hand the keys over. We sat at the same table where everything between us had quietly begun. The light poured through the window, warm and soft, turning the air gold. She reached for her cup, and I noticed her hand trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said after a moment. "I just needed to remember who I was before all this." "All this?" I asked quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, open. "Before I started feeling something I shouldn't." My breath caught. "You think it was wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she traced the rim of her cup with her finger, the small movement hypnotic. "No," she said finally. "Just, complicated. You reminded me that I could still feel alive. I don't know if I should thank you for that or hate you a little." A faint laugh escaped me, not mocking, just sad. Maybe a little of both. We sat there in silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything unspoken, every look, every near touch, every almost confession that had brought us here. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the door. The same way she always had. Only this time, she stopped me before I could reach for the handle. Her eyes met mine, steady, certain, and she said, "Don't worry about my heart. It still races." The words hit harder this time, not as a tease, but as a truth. A farewell wrapped in something more tender. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at her, memorizing the way the light fell across her face, the quiet strength in her posture, the small tremor in her breath. And then, for the first time, she stepped forward and hugged me. Not a polite gesture, a real one. Her arms around me, her head resting briefly against my shoulder. Her heartbeat, fast, undeniable, pressed softly against my chest. When she pulled away, she smiled, though her eyes glistened. "Go," she said gently. "You have too much life ahead to stay here waiting for mine to start again." I nodded, but as I walked away, I couldn't help turning back. She was standing in the doorway, sunlight behind her, one hand pressed lightly over her heart, the same one she said still raced. And in that moment, I knew, some stories don't need a perfect ending. Just someone who makes you remember what it feels like to be alive.